BBC2 steels itself for yet another visit to Sheffield for World Snooker. Here, Panorama, after the news, considers the effects on our social workers of the latest alarming rise in the numbers of children at risk from abuse. At 10:10, Barry Norman reviews Flowers in the Attic, starring Victoria Tennant, and also looks at the latest video releases. Come Dancing begins a new series at 10:40, with Angela Rippon leading off the competition at the Guildhall in Southampton, where Wales and the North East meet in light-footed combat. Finally, we get down to business matters at 11:25. Programmes yet to come tonight on BBC1.
The 9 o'clock news from the BBC with Martyn Lewis and Moira Stuart.
America's attack on Iranian oil platforms. President Reagan says they must know that if they threaten us, they'll pay a price.
An unguarded British oil barge is hit as the Iranians strike back.
Tonight's poll tax vote, the government's majority could be cut by 2/3.
Guilty, an Israeli court decides Demyanyuk is the death camp torturer Ivan the Terrible.
And a pointer for the future. The Prime Minister tells British businessmen to gear up for the challenge of 1992. Good evening. President Reagan says that this morning's attack by the United States on Iranian oil platforms in the Gulf is to make it clear that Iran will pay a price for aggression against American ships. Last week, 10 US sailors were injured when their frigate hit a mine, which America believes was the result of new mine-laying operations by the Iranians. Iran, said the president, should have no illusions about the cost of irresponsible behavior. At 9 o'clock local time, American warships attacked 2 Iranian oil platforms and sank an Iranian patrol boat which fired at them. 3 hours later, Iranian gunboats retaliated against an oil rig off Sharjah, manned largely by Americans. A British tanker used as a storage vessel was also hit. The crew abandoned ship. No one was hurt. At 4 o'clock in the Strait of Hormuz, 2 Iranian frigates were badly damaged in an exchange of fire with American fighters. Within minutes, Iranian gunboats had carried out another attack, this time on a Cypriot tanker going through the strait. Mrs. Thatcher said the American action was entirely justified, but Labour's Foreign Affairs spokesman Gerald Kaufman said the ratchet of escalation had been turned most dangerously.
This long day of conflict in the Gulf began at 2 separate locations almost simultaneously. American warships approaching the Iranian oil rigs with this warning.
You have less than 1 minute. Evacuate the platform immediately. I repeat, evacuate immediately. We don't have the order. Evacuate immediately. We will commence firing in less than 30 seconds.
Seconds later, the bombardment began, starting major fires, crippling a combined daily oil production of 150,000 barrels, and, according to the Pentagon, disabling radar sets used by Iran's Revolutionary Guards. The rig at Siri wasn't just blasted with gunfire. A squad of Marines was sent on board later to plant explosives as well. An Iranian fast attack craft responded by firing a missile at an American frigate. It missed and was then itself sunk in a volley of 4 American rockets. Washington describes its action as retaliation for the mining of the USS Roberts last week. The frigate was badly holed below the waterline. 2 more mines have since been found and destroyed in the same area, and it's thought a further 10 may have been released as well. Iran is blamed, though it denies it's responsible. But Washington points to the capture last October of an Iranian vessel, the Iran Ajah, found with mines on board. According to the Pentagon, the serial numbers on the mines being found now tally with that last catch, and they look newly planted. This morning's attacks were meant to deter. This they've apparently failed to do. Within 3 hours, Iranian Revolutionary Guards in small patrol craft attacked the Mubarak oil field staffed by Americans, Britons and others. The installation was set ablaze. An American support ship, the Willie Tide, which went to help, was attacked, as was a Hong Kong-registered tanker, the York Marine, flying a red ensign. Everyone involved was evacuated safely, though I understand tonight its operators are annoyed the Royal Navy wasn't on hand to offer help. They say that since Britain was told of America's action in advance, an Iranian attack should have been prepared for. But Ministry of Defence officials say that although the ship was entitled to protection, the Royal Navy's Armilla Patrol was not aware of her presence in the Gulf, a statement denied tonight by the ship's operators. Meanwhile, the government has been quick to support America's action today.
What is necessary, I think, to make very clear is that there are countries in the Gulf with whom we have friendly relations and with whom we have massive amount of trade. I mean, the Gulf Middle East area is our third largest trading partner after the United States and Europe. We have a right to say to Iran or anyone else who threatens international shipping lanes, we will defend the right of our sailors to go out and carry British goods and services to Middle Eastern countries and carry their oil back to us and our allies. And we shall continue to do that, and we shan't be put off by these acts of Iranian aggression.
Though Britain is backing Washington's policy, its own preference involves none of the American high-profile military presence. Now, Iran's promise of a holy war in response will put that policy to the test.
It had been anticipated that a White House order to retaliate would come sooner or later. It came last night from the president. The forces went into action while Mr. Reagan slept, and today he gave this explanation.
We've taken this action to make certain the Iranians have no illusions about the cost of irresponsible behavior. We aim to deter further Iranian aggression, not provoke it. They must know that we will protect our ships, and if they threaten us, they'll pay a price.
U.S. warships say the Pentagon had no difficulty in identifying that the mines were Iranian. Following detonations over the past few days, the Americans say the mines were identical to those seized from an Iranian vessel last summer. This evening, Defense Secretary Frank Carlucci gave the latest information. A total of 6 Iranian vessels, including 2 frigates, have been sunk or severely damaged by American forces. This was his assessment of the Iranians' behavior.
I'm not sure that it's explainable in terms of Western logic at this point. I have to only assume that it's some kind of a fanatical reaction or slavish obedience to a contingency plan. But it certainly makes no sense whatsoever in military terms, and we hope that tomorrow will bring peace in the region.
The State Department is emphasizing that the president took the least severe of the options presented before him and even allowed Iranians to escape from the oil platforms before they were attacked. So the surprise here is not that America retaliated, but that Iran's reaction has been sustained and over such a widespread area. Tonight it is being suggested that there are contingency plans to attack an Iranian naval base at Bandar Abbas if the level of hostilities increases. But at the moment the area is quiet and the Americans hope it will remain so. This is Michael Macmillan for the 9 o'clock news in Washington.
A member of the Kuwaiti royal family on board the hijacked airliner at Algiers airport has pleaded with the negotiators to give in to the hijackers' demands. Fadel al-Sabah, a distant relative of the Emir of Kuwait, sounded unwell as he repeated his captor's call for the release of 17 Islamic militants jailed in Kuwait.
Before dawn, as Muslims were being called to prayer, Algiers was beginning the first day of the holy month of Ramadan. It's traditionally a time of peace and reconciliation, but it was far from clear whether these sentiments would influence the men on the Kuwaiti airliner who've already killed twice since the hijack began. They appear to be observing the custom of fasting during the hours of daylight. They asked for food to be delivered to the plane before dawn. But it soon became apparent that their attitude to their hostages had not softened. A member of the Kuwaiti royal family who's on board was brought to the radio. When he spoke, gasping for breath, he seemed close to collapse. In the brief message, he repeated the hijackers' demands. His voice then trailed away. The hijackers said he was unable to go on. The morale of the passengers and crew still on board Flight 422 can only be guessed. They've now spent 2 weeks isolated from the outside world in squalid conditions under the constant threat of death. They must be painfully aware that unless the deadlock is broken soon, the hijackers may again feel it necessary to convert words into action. This is Peter Gould for the 9 o'clock news in Algiers.
In just under an hour's time, the government faces what is likely to be the largest backbench rebellion so far this Parliament over its plans to replace rates with a community charge. Last week, the government tried to defuse the rebellion by limiting the impact of the charge on the low-paid. But today, Labour produced a leaked government document which, they said, showed that the concessions were bogus. Tonight, MPs are voting on an amendment linking the charge to people's ability to pay. The amendment, proposed by the Conservative MP Michael Mates, means that a basic rate taxpayer would still pay the charge in full, but a non-taxpayer would pay only half as much, while higher rate taxpayers would pay 1.5 times the charge for their particular area.
The most serious revolt since Mrs. Thatcher became Prime Minister almost 9 years ago produced a shudder of anxiety among ministers and stage management on their backbenches that was worthy of the theatre. More than a dozen Tory MPs interrupted Michael Mates's opening speech, but he was determined to make clear how wrong he thought his own government was.
And when we started down this most difficult of roads to reform a very, very complex but outdated and unfair system, we said in terms, we will abolish the rates, we will replace it with a tax more broadly based and based on people's ability to pay.
But Nicholas Ridley was equally adamant that the Met's proposal would produce poverty traps. When people got a pay rise, they'd lose far more than that in extra community charge.
This new clause, I say to my honourable friend, is in fact unworkable. We have achieved ability to pay through the rebate system at the bottom end of the scale and through asking the better off to contribute to the